it was one of the reasons why Buddhism appealed to me, at least like the more austere stuff, is because there wasn't a lot of like, yeah, let's all have heart-based practices and love. And it was like, no, that's where I've felt betrayed. That's where I've had my heart broken. That's where I've felt hurt tremendously. Let's go just agree that everything's an illusion and this doesn't matter. Essentially, I was like, all right, that's messy as fuck in there. And that has gotten me into some seriously painful places. Let's just not go there anymore. I was really attracted to the idea of just being able to like bloop and not have to experience that and not feel vulnerability or pain. And I don't think it was necessarily advertised to that, but I wouldn't say I'm the only one that went towards that. I know a lot of state chasers and bypassers that are on that path.
Definitely.
And I was one of them.
You are listening to The New Man, Beyond the Macho Jerk and the New Age Wimp. Your host is men's coach Tripp Lanier.
Are you devoted to anything other than money, security, or status? Does living with an open heart make you weak? And how is staying guarded killing your aliveness? I grew up guarded and armored, and for many years, I thought it was necessary and strong to cut myself off from any kind of emotional vulnerability. The truth is, I was fragile, and I was incapable of being in emotionally challenging situations. That way of living almost destroyed me. For the last 20 years, I've watched my wife Alyson navigate life very differently. She's one of those rare few that can effortlessly disarm people and help them access their own hearts. Her strength in emotional situations is inspiring for me. It's her superpower. So is this just something she was born with, or is it a skill that she's developed? I've always wanted to know, but never asked, until today. All right. Good morning.
Good morning. How's my
I need you. I do need you to work. Use the microphone.
Husband?
Your loving husband is great.
So, you got a actual person asking an actual question.
I always have actual people. I just changed the names.
Some of it seemed so sketchy with the
names are different. I want to protect people's identity.
As well as the jobs.
The jobs are real.
So, but this, so you got another person.
I'm thinking about starting nicotine.
I know you are.
I'm thinking about it.
I can tell because you're doing lots of research on it.
I am.
You know, that's an addictive substance, just like coffee and sugar.
And cocaine.
And cocaine.
This is like, remember when like it was catching on and then, I haven't done it. Yeah, so if you're addicted to nicotine, but you're in denial, I want to hear about it. I'm not addicted. I could quit anytime. I just need a bump here and there.
Yeah. So we're way off of our 15-minute game right now.
This is but I feel like I have a question. I have a question for you.
Yes. What's your question?
How do you stay open-hearted?
To you?
Yes, to me. We'll start there. Because I know that every once in a while I might be a little difficult.
just once in a blue moon.
How do you stay open-hearted?
Are you asking seriously though, like in general?
I'm serious.
Or do you mean in general though, or do you mean with you? Like
you are very kind. You practice. You are consistently kind, and you're consistently considerate. And I wonder if it's a trauma response. Because I'm not, and I'm trying to. No, but it's like if you learn, like, okay, if I'm kind and I'm gentle and I'm open-hearted, I'm less likely to be attacked, or I'm less likely to be criticized. So I wonder if it's that, or if there's how intentional you are around your open-heartedness.
I mean, I don't,
because I'm very open-hearted, and
yeah. In theory.
I'm wondering how you got there too. We've never talked about it.
Very open heart. You have great ideas of open-heartedness.
Ouch, that hurt my heart. You just said that.
You have a guarded heart, but you have a big heart. I'd say it like that.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. It's like I've learned to guard my heart.
Yeah. I mean, that's a question. There is a longer answer to this question.
I want to hear the longer answer.
Answer?
I'm genuinely interested
really
in this.
Sweet of you. I appreciate your genuine curiosity. So there's a couple of different threads that feel like central tenets of my way of being. And these are tenets that were conscious, intentional tenets. Like I choose for this to shape my life. But so there are those, and I'll speak to those, but I do want to just say overall, I think that I came out as my temperament. I just came out a really loving kid. Like I just came out of my mom super loving. I remember essentially loving everything when I was a kid. I'd, run out and play and in the yard, like I'd be in the woods and just literally, I still have that experience. Like I just go out into nature and I'm like, oh my God, I love this. Oh, I love this. I love this. I love everything, So I do kind of have that temperament. I remember when I was a kid, my mom used to even marvel a little bit, like, what? You're like doing cartwheels out of bed. You're so like ready for loving the day. And she didn't say it like that.
Was that towards others or just more towards
kind of everything?
Nature?
No, I was always really happy. I would always be in a really good mood. And people around me were like, why are you in such
Shut it down.
Yeah, like it's fucking 6 a.m. Chill out. So, I mean, and honestly, I kind of looking back, I'm like, well, maybe I was ADD and nobody knew it. And that was just kind of how I expressed my,
So you came out.
So I kind of came out. I have a temperament. I would say that my core temperament is one of loving, just open and loving. That's just kind of a core temperament. I was lucky enough to have a mother that was also very, very loving. And even if there were some, pathology to that ended up not being great, that she, in her core, she was an incredibly loving, kind person. And I do think that she was largely, sort of appeasing in many times, but as a kid, I didn't know what appeasing was, and as a trauma response. And so it just occurred to me as loving.
Let's spell that out. So appeasing is, I'm going to give you what you want so that you don't, so that there's not a conflict.
Yeah. It's essentially think like a submissive dog, like our puppy, our dog that we have, she's a submissive play type, meaning she will kind of curl down on her back or belly or on her side, and she'll be wagging her tail the whole time, like, yay, let's play. And she wants to play, but she's gonna do it from being the underdog. And so most dogs, when they see that stance, are like, all right, you're not a threat. Appeasing is like when you're quite literally appeasing the other person, so there's no aggression towards you. As a kid, though, when you're a kid, you don't know these nuances. And so she just occurred to me as very, very loving. And she was very loving to me. So there's the one thread. But as I grew, I think that there were a couple of other things that were really central. And some was spiritual practice. And I was really into Native American spirituality for many decades, starting very, very young. And one of the earliest things I remember, I was playing by myself. I was super young in the woods. And there was a very direct kind of, I don't know what I'd call it now, but it was maybe a transmission or a teaching or whatever. But it had to do with that. It had to do with loving all things. And
how old were you?
I was probably 6 or 7. I was a free range kid. And I remember there was sort of this experience of, I don't really remember the details, but I remember there was some sort of experience of like that one showing me that through the heart, through the love, is connection. And there was sort of like this an experience of like there's the trees and the deer and the snakes and all of that, and everybody just chills out with and then connects.
But the message was specifically about love.
You
received it that way.
That's how I received it.
Yeah.
I could have been about something completely different, but that's how I experienced it. And it really wasn't a verbal thing. There weren't words, but there was just a way of being. And that way of being could be, I think, translated as love, just love. It's like connection through love. So that happened, and then it was, when you're a kid, it's like, okay, that happened, whatever. Like I brushed it off. It wasn't like, oh my God, this is a life path. It just was something that showed up. And then I fast forward to, I was probably 19, and my very first job was with what they labeled as severely emotionally disturbed kids at a lockdown facility. And I found myself, and then consecutively for the next, essentially 10 years after that, I worked, almost 10 years, 8 years after that, I worked as a child protective services worker. I worked as a social worker. I was in the trenches, so to speak. Like I was working in places and in the fields, aspects of the field where there was for real shit going on, like heavy terrible shit going on. And I got to witness essentially the opposite of what happens when we don't love openly. And there's just tremendous fallout. There's tremendous suffering. There's tremendous neglect. There's tremendous abuse. There's tremendous trauma. And it's just really fucking clear. I mean, as a social worker, I remember one of the jobs I had was I have several stories like this, but one of the jobs I had was to just go, like, you're supposed to go check on the kids and basically find out if they're still being abused or neglected or whatever. But you hang out with them, you give them resources and other things. And I remember just being that way of being with them, and they would just flourish. They would just blossom.
So, because I know people that are first responders and people that go into these tough places. My dad was a cop. I was around a lot of cops. There's a lot of armoring that has to happen so that you can function, because you're going into some really tough places and you see things that just don't make sense about what's fair and what's not fair, and people that are good people getting hurt for no particular reason. And it can breed a nihilism, and it can breed a like I said, that guardedness. I also know stuff about your childhood that was it was really difficult.
Yeah.
How did you maintain this anchor or this North Star of this loving way of being, though? Because it seems like there was a lot of headwind.
Yeah.
That could have easily justified armoring. And I know that you have a certain armoring you can do socially.
Yeah.
And with certain people, I witnessed that. But there is always a North Star of just coming back to home base, which is this loving way of being.
Yeah.
So that's where I was curious if you were aware of that at that time, or do you think it was just more the temperament?
I don't know if I can answer that like as a knowing, like, oh, here's how I am. But I remember, I want to say one thing, because this stood out to me as a formative experience, and this stayed as a formative experience pretty much, and it still is, which may have showed up earlier and I just don't remember it. But in that very first job at the lockdown facility, I remember there was this kid who was labeled dangerous, like straight up dangerous. We would have trainings on how to, do particular holds and takedowns and stuff on people that were threats to other people or themselves. So you'd have that kind of training in case if someone was a harm to other people. And this person was, basically everybody was afraid of this person. Mm-hmm. He was a young kid. He was from the inner city of DC. He was fucking so fucked up. Like, he was hurting so bad. It was so clear that he was hurting so bad. And he was so armored. Like, nobody got to him. And hair trigger, like, violent, would go to violence, 0 to 10, violence in a heartbeat. And I remember there was a scenario where, and it was a very volatile scenario with him. And there were 2 other staff, 1 or 2 other staff there. And essentially nobody was big enough to take him down if we needed to. And I just remember being like, this person is a human being and they are hurting. Like, all I could think of was like how they must be so scared. They must be just hurting so hard inside. And I just was talking to him straight. I looked him right in the eye and I stayed really calm. And I just let him know, I was like, this has to be really scary for you. Like, there's got people around you. You've got like, what happens in these situations where people are going to like eventually probably take you down if you start to get active, physically active. And I was like, that sounds, and I don't remember what else I said, but he started to connect with me. He would take moments where he would like start looking at me, almost like a wild horse that would find like a safe tree. And ultimately we didn't have to take him down. And ultimately he didn't, we were able to get him from point A to point B without incident. But it wasn't anybody other than me just really connecting with him. And I remember in that moment, I was still scared. Like, I was very aware he could have hurt me badly. Like, he could have come after me. But there was something that I don't know. There was just something I just knew was like, this is just a human being. Mm-hmm. This is just a human with a heart and fears and wounds and, armor just like the rest of us. And there was something in my willingness to just treat him as a human, like kind of equal. Mm-hmm. Someone that deserves care, that really shifted. I mean, all the staff was like, what the hell did you do? And nobody's ever had that experience with him. That was it was a big thing. So I got the reflection that was a thing. And that was really formative for me in the moment because I was scared, but I did it anyway. Mm-hmm. And I think that I did, with all this sort of swimming upstream kind of stuff, I think that one of the other pieces that showed up for me, other than like being in environments where when we withhold that, it creates a lot of trouble, was a spiritual thread and hearing stories. I remember hearing stories, not many, but a few of Mother Teresa and like, her willingness to face really kind of ghastly situations with heart. And that fit from these little sort of points that were threaded into my being, like that threaded meaning like little places that were sewn into me of like, this.
In the spiritual community you were in at that time, in the practice, was there a heart-based practice there, or was it more of a reverent? Like, what would you? So I didn't have
a spiritual community until I was 18. But I was deeply spiritual on my own, but
while you were working with in the CPS stuff.
Yeah, I did actually. Yeah, but so CPS by then I did. I had found a native teacher. I was doing sweat lodges and such back then. So what was your question?
What kind of work were you doing in a spiritual context with your community or with your teacher? And because that's a big part of this, whether we see it or not.
Yeah, it was a big part of it. I mean,
or at least you could just talk, you don't have to talk
is,
about the actual it, but you can talk about what it was focused on, or like because to me it's like I'm aware. I hung out with a lot of bald Buddhists. There wasn't a lot of heart reverence. There was a lot of like
a lot of whacking.
There's a lot of like, it's a fucking illusion. Get over it.
Yeah.
Oh, you're having another illusion. Get over it. And I was like, oh, this is great. And
well, the thing about the thing you should know about a Native American context, at least the lineage that I was inducted into was we're not going to sit around and do classes about things. Nobody sits down and teaches you principles of things. You just show up and you lean in as a community member, and then you learn by doing and you learn by watching. So there wasn't anybody that said, here's how we roll, ever. So there wasn't that. There wasn't a community like principles or here's how we lead with our hearts. There wasn't that. But there was a ton of behavior.
It was embodied.
There was embodied behavior of people being kind and loving and generous to each other, no matter who they were, because we'd sweat 2 times a month and anybody was welcome. And so I was a regular. It was like a pillar of being there. And so I saw people show up, and I would watch them be shy and be kind of nervous and uncomfortable. And I would watch how my teacher, as well as other people in the community, would be super open and warm to them. Not necessarily like, hey, welcome, not like that, but just normal. Mm-hmm. Like they wouldn't run over and greet them necessarily, but they, those people could settle, like they kind of got comfortable. They realized this was a safe place. So there was just this really cool kind of place to witness how people behaved when we just treated each other as, people.
And what did the sweat lodges do for you in terms of, when I've done sweat lodges, I don't know if I necessarily recall it being a heart-opening experience.
What's your experience?
Kind of like being cooked in a car in Central Florida in August in the dark.
That's really funny. I got a lot of people that might describe it like that, but
I mean, I don't know if I recall the heart opening aspect of things. I do remember a surrendering, like as a surrender practice of when things get uncomfortable, and there's like I want to head for the flap and get out, and then there's just you stay.
Yeah, I mean there is that. That's generally the first round. If you're gonna have 4 rounds, but it also depends. I mean that depends on who was pouring. Mm-hmm. Who was.
The one we did. Well, anyway, with before our wedding, it was already 110 outside. I don't know if you remember that one. That was there's a surrender aspect of it, but did that impact the heart opening or loving practice for you, the sweat lodges?
Yes. So essentially, I mean, I want to say 2 things about the sweat lodges because I'm like, I need to be self-depreciating here because I was also 8 and 9 fucking teen and 20 and 21 at this time, or 22, whatever. Like I was even in my mid 20, let's see, when I was a CPS worker, I was probably 26 or so, or 7, but like even then I was like a typical white privileged girl. Like I would go out and I would do these really hard days with social work, like, working with the sheriff's department, working with investigators or working with major like hospitals, major shit. Mm-hmm. And then I would have the sweat lodge, and the sweat lodge was essentially my safe place to really kind of fall apart. And I would fall apart. So I was often lamenting in those lodges, and I was lamenting to whoever would listen, whatever higher powers were out there that could listen. And often I was like in my not open-hearted place, but often like why feeling my young self of like just my broken heart, feeling my broken heart for all these people.
That's a stage of our lives where the reality of the world really can start to sink in, and it's not Disney World.
It definitely wasn't Disney, and all of the jobs that I had for the last, since 19, none of them were Disney. None of them. There was no aspect of Disney anywhere to be seen. I mean, I definitely was walking away from that decade with zero population growth idea, with like all families are fucked. Like I just kind of I jaded myself pretty hard in that time. And so that was my armoring showed up in that way of like, I will not perpetuate this.
So I'm not going to have it. So you're saying it impacted you not to have kids.
It impacted me like
families
this is,
are gross.
We're all screwed.
That to me is like what I'm speaking to is like I know you can have that aspect of yourself, but somehow you still come back to
I think it was the
loving
lodge. I mean, it was being able to lament.
Giving yourself that space.
Giving myself that space where I wasn't holding it all and I didn't have to compute it all and I didn't have to come to any conclusions. I could just be brokenhearted and allowing myself to be brokenhearted about it. I think it helped keep me human, if that makes sense.
Totally.
And so there was very much that. There was a lot of lamenting. like I remember at one point people around me were like, "Okay, Alyson, tone down." Like
in the lodge.
Oh yeah, in the lodge. I'm like bawling and that only happened once, but nonetheless, it was like I usually wasn't aware of my surroundings. It was just my own safe space, even though there was like lots of other people in there. So I was taking up a lot of space in the lodge emotionally, but
I envy that you had a space like that where you felt safe to do that, because I think that if more of us did, it would be easier to, like, if we had a place where we felt like we could go, and also it's dark.
Yeah.
And
yes,
somewhat very private.
Yeah, it is.
You're in and plus just the physical craziness that starts to happen when you're cooking in that environment. Like, it just creates a state change where you just have a lot less resistance to whatever is there.
Yeah. And I never had as much of a state change with the physical heat as much as I did with the songs. So we would sing medicine songs, and I came over many years, I came to learn what those medicine songs, like what the medicine was of each song, and came to sort of, I always felt I felt the song, but I didn't know like what was really happening. Mm-hmm. But over time, as someone who was in earnest wanting to walk that path, came to learn what the medicines were of each song. And so that created a state change for sure. I could feel healing happen in the songs. And the heat, what you're talking about with the surrender, I actually think that was a critical part, even though most people, that's usually what scares most people away from meditation or lodges or whatever else. But what that did for me was help me remember, like, I'm only human, not in a be small, be meager kind of way, but in a way of like really recognizing that there's big things. There's things way bigger than us, than we can grok in the day world and in our human lives. There's things complex and dynamics that we can't keep up with. And there's also things that, like, it's sort of like you don't even know what you're looking at, kind of like you think you have a sense of the unseen of the great mystery. You have no idea what you're looking at. So there was just this sense, there was something that initiatory round, that first round with the heat would do to just kind of crack the glass, ceiling on all that.
I think that's really important because when we are really small self-centered and we're making the world about us, and there is an illusion of control, but there's also an illusion of responsibility to things that are just far outside of our control.
Which is where I think armoring comes from. I mean, any kind of armoring, any kind of reactivity, all that small self stuff. That's as you know, Terry Real would say, our adaptive child. Like it's what we have. It's what we're doing because we don't feel like we're in control. But it's coming from a grasping place usually, or it's coming from an angry place, or it's coming from a whatever contemptive place or whatever. But it's coming from some place that's not our bigger essential self.
There's something about feeling more powerful when, I don't know if powerful is the word.
Power is not the word.
Whole. I don't know what the word is, but there is something about when that illusion of power and that illusion of control gets relaxed.
Yeah.
That there's an ease that arises, not from the place of a victim, like, oh, I'm off the hook. I can't do anything. I'm powerless here. But there was something, as you were talking about it, I felt something relax in my chest, and it's reminded me of experiences I've had over the years, whether in meditation or in medicine ceremonies as well. And so there is a place of like, it's a correction. It's a correction of perspective of this is yours and this is not yours. Like, what is yours that you handle, and what is not yours to handle?
Yeah, and so that you're actually speaking to kind of the third piece of how and why I think those lodges really saved my ass in those really hard years of the kind of work that I was doing was, and kind of unbeknownst to me, but all of the hardship that I had lived through up until that point was that, like, this isn't mine. Like, I get to just give it over. And the prayer round in a traditional, at least Lakota lodge, a prayer round it's essentially we're dishing it out. We're giving it over. And the prayers are like, what is really in our hearts? What's our bodies and our hearts really heavy with and are holding, and what can we literally give over as like, I got nothing here. I'm tapping out. Like, this is way beyond me. This is bigger than me. I can't hold this. And so there was a real sense of like, I mean, I remember some of the big, heavy prayers that I was making towards some of the really troubled families that I was working with. And I would remember anytime I would say the prayer, my, teacher would, she'd throw water on the rocks. And I just remember there was sort of a thing around, like, every time I would, like, and this, and this. And there was something that she was helping with something, unseen there, but, or inviting something unseen, but it was a very palpable experience of giving it over. I want to thank you for this question. I was very surprised to hear you ask this. Well,
I still want to go. I still want to have more.
Okay. Well, I the only question I have right now for you is, you said you felt something in your heart chest relax. And so were you not feeling relaxed before and now you are?
No, it was more of like the experience of hearing truth. Like there's when something comes across and it's like, oh, right. Just that reminder. For me, it's an oscillation between the grasping, controlling, small self, which is there. Yeah. And then whatever access I can have more to the big self, or capital S self, and throughout the day. And when I can find my seat in more and more into the capital S self, there's just a relaxing, there's just a letting go. It's not a tightening up or contraction by any means. Mm-hmm. And so when you said that, I felt more of like, oh, right. Yeah. Like there's things that it's easy to take on. Well, there's these gigantic events in the world, or things that are happening with somebody else over there, that even it's somebody we love, but it's theirs. It's not ours. Right. And we can care deeply about it, but it's not ours to fix. Mm-hmm. And
there's nothing we could, there's really, it's kind of presumptuous and big headed to think that we could fix a thing. But
still in this place though, where I could see where it would create, I'm getting where you had an outlet to essentially move a lot of this. Had you kept it bottled up, it would have eaten you.
Oh, I think so, for sure. I also still with, being a Gestalt, like studying Gestalt really helped because it was a similar setting where catharsis was welcome.
So you had an outlet for that. And then is it hand in hand? Were you aware of any kind of loving practices? I'm thinking of, well, go ahead.
I mean, the devotion that I've had with my spiritual path was a loving practice in and of itself. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of love and devotion for the sort of resource of the mystery, and all of the forces and the way that there's a whole kind of theoretical framework that comes with that particular spirituality, that where all things are our relations, and all things we can be in relationship with those things. And I'm a relationship girl. I did real well with that theological orientation. And so the practice was to be in a relationship with all things.
I think that what I appreciate about that was that even when I was struggling with the idea of spirituality and religion, I could grasp, if we think of Ken Wilber's three faces of God, there's the God in I, the divine that lives in all of us, through us on the I level. And then there's the God that is in all things out in the world, so we can see the divinity in all the things. But then there was always this gap in the thou, in the you. I have reverence for you, the other. And that is where religion largely lives. And I noticed that for me, that was where I just shut the door on the idea, because for me, it meant a guy in a beard and flip-flops that was judging everybody and condemning everybody and doing terrible things. And
in the IU?
In the I, yeah, like in a relationship. So when you describe having this reverent, loving relationship, it was not with the guy in the beard.
No.
Right. But you'd had that your whole life as a very young girl.
Yeah, as a young thing.
And the more that I've cultivated that for myself, I have found that that's where, for me, the heart space is. And it was largely missing. And the others were kind of, I remember having an experience as a young person, probably maybe I was 11 or 12 when I was diving a reef. We used to spend a lot of time on the water. And I remember just kind of having a zap, fucking time stood still. And I was over the reef and just noticing everything moving and everything alive. And I look back on it now and I was like, oh, I was in an altered state there. And I remember just being like, what the fuck was that? And I'd been on that reef, I don't know, hundreds of times. But that experience was unique to me and very
experience, powerful. Tell me what,
I didn't feel heart opening. I felt awe. I felt wonder, and I felt interconnected.
So you had a mystical experience. Those classify as
I had a mystical experience, but it wasn't a heart-opening connection relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that what I'm appreciating about your path is that you've had relationship with this other.
Yes.
The whole time.
Yes. Yeah. And so that is unique I don't know how unique it is, but I want to just kind of drop for a minute into a little bit of a teachy place, because I think this is helpful as a framework. You're describing coming from a particular framework, and I don't know that your family ever took you into that framework. It just came at you in the community, but that framework left you feeling more isolated. So it was much less relational. And so, and when people come from that framework, often there's sort of even if there's praying or if there's a desire to reach out, there's a lot of the reaching without the taking time to learn how to receive. People do this in relationship too, by the way, but just there's the reaching. So it's I heard it described not that long ago of if you're saying if you're playing the Marco Polo game, but you're so busy saying Marco, Marco, instead
So you're saying
of receiving the polo.
So people are that their
So
approach,
it's one way.
their approach, but it's from a spiritual perspective. It's just Marco, but not listening.
Not listening for the polo. And what I think is different about from a very young age, for me, I was kind of initiated into the Marco Polo. I was initiated into what is I think theologians call it two-way prayer. So where you say a thing, but then you wait and you listen. Mm-hmm. Or you start with listening and then you can engage in dialogue.
Or you have your antenna up throughout the day.
Or you have your antenna, which is what the native path is very much like, it's what I think today people call animism. And it's like, yeah, you have an opportunity at any time to say hello or to receive something.
That's why you freaked out when we had our first kiss and an owl flew right over our head.
Yes. That's right. I didn't freak out in a bad way. I just freaked out like, oh, snap. Life's about to change.
Big fucking owl flew right over our head.
Yeah, that's true. Where owls don't usually hang out. So yeah, that was a big deal for me.
I think this is really critical because what that provides is that is a safe place and a loving place and a consistent place where, as you pointed out, like if we don't have that, we essentially live in isolation. Even if we're in the Marco like way of doing things, we can still feel very isolated. If we're kind of putting quarters in the machine and we're not getting anything back, we can feel ignored. Mm-hmm. And so it helps me understand because this relational piece is for me where the heart lives and all of this. Mm-hmm. And it helps me understand that you can stay in that place and stay open-hearted because it was I don't know if fruitful is the right word, but there was an exchange happening there where you may not have had that with other people in your life. You had that the whole time. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. Even in my very first, very serious incident with somebody who was deemed violent and dangerous. And it's like there was still an exchange happening, which even just with eyes, just with like really seeing each other, even if words weren't being processed, So that happens and that's available. And so I think that coupled with my path of the kind of work that I, as a therapist or whatever, like taking that kind of healer's path, that there's something that I feel like I have a knack for, which is seeing into people's hearts. And so regardless of you're kind of separating the wheat from the chaff. It's like, regardless of what's happening all around and how they're posturing or collapsing or how they're wounded, how they're angry or whatever's going on, I can still see past that. And that's real for me. And I think because that's real for me, I mean, I've had people reflect that that's real for them too. They experience that, I think because that's real for me, I have come to trust that. So it doesn't feel like I'm appeasing from that place.
When I've observed you, I know what your appeasing can look like. And
yeah, I'm not really actually in there or in contact when I'm appeasing.
Yeah.
I'm hiding. That's what appeasing is.
You have taught me so much over the years, and I just look at it as a superpower that you have this ability. You've had it the whole time I've known you. I know your guardedness, and you are very good at being guarded. You're not.
I'm probably the most guarded around you.
You're not.
Times.
You're not Miss Beaming love and light all the time.
Yeah, I'm definitely I get sucked up into myself, small self too.
But what I do notice is like how quickly you can and will pivot into seeing the love in people and seeing their hearts first and foremost. And especially like when we were underslept and had a young child and she'd be screaming or whatever. And it would be easy to do the parenting thing of like, shut up, here's the thing or whatever. And you would just take a moment just to be with her. And it was like, what the fuck just happened? Like, how did you do that? Even though intellectually I knew exactly what you did, it was more that you could pivot to that in those places. So you've amazed me over the years, and I've, it's not that I don't think that we can, all of us, kind of find our hearts. I mean, for some of us, it's really challenging, but it's the ability to pivot and come back to heart that I really appreciate about you. And
thank you.
And you challenge me. I feel embarrassed a lot.
Thank you for naming
by
that.
Your humility, by your just ability to do that, and
why is that embarrassing for you? I think it's sweet that you said that, but I'm curious what is embarrassing.
If I were to get into comparisons,
I
look like a fucking Neanderthal next to you. And which is why I try to have my own friends, because as soon as they meet you, they're like, well, we want to hang out with Alyson instead. And it's like, well,
you're so funny.
Fine.
You're so funny. So, I can think of a few who prefer your company over mine.
But again, it's not about inflating you, but you have consistently, I grow to appreciate your open-heartedness and your ability that you have a skill to navigate with heart and see the heart in others. And I watch you disarm people beautifully and de-escalate beautifully. And I know there's skill involved, but there's also just something about you that's like, man, it's fucking, you have this crazy thing about you. And I think that's why so many people love you so much.
Thank you so much. That's really sweet of you to say. I welcome the love. My friend's Christian, she's like, you're easy to love. And I always thought I've never heard anybody say that before. But thank you. Yeah, thank you. You're like making me misty-eyed.
Thank you for I need you as a teacher. I see you as a teacher in my life in this way. And I'm really grateful that our daughter has you as well. Yeah.
I don't know what to say to that other than you're welcome and thank you. Also, like it falls flat if you're not available. There was something you said I wanted to kind of speak to, and I don't know if you said something about my heart that you said something like you wish everybody had a version of that. And I can't remember how you said it, but I think me having the experiences that I had, particularly a place to go, like that felt safe to have that kind of catharsis, like to have that, to be able to lament, to be able to be brokenhearted or to be able to express the places like you said, it would have eaten me alive. And there's no doubt it would have. And I think that there's a thing that everybody has to learn to seek out. I'm saying this more as the therapist in me because I've worked with people that my office, my space has been that place where people seek, like they've sought out a space like my space.
Seek it out so they can express this.
Yes. So essentially what you're speaking to, I think that people don't have yet, because they don't have that place to be brokenhearted or to lament or to have their catharsis or fall apart or whatever it is, they stop trusting their heart. So I think for me, my path with what you've drawn out of me today in terms of like figuring out how I am the way I am, I believe, if I were to kind of sum it up, that has created an experience of me trusting my heart.
Yeah, I mean, just as you said that, I was like, I don't think I'd trusted my heart for many, many years. That's
what I'm saying. And so it can look a lot of different ways, like, I don't trust you, or I don't trust relationship or the world or whatever. But when it comes down to it, it's like, can we be with as big as our heart is? Can we be with the capacity that our heart is holding? Or when our hearts feel like they can't hold all that, can we be with that too? and learn how to allow our hearts to come through, because our hearts have so much fucking to say, so much wisdom, so much expression, so much life force and creativity and just all that, as well as heartbreak and grief and all of that. And so if there's a space where we can let our hearts free, so to speak, like let them be expressed, I think over time we learn to trust what's there. And that's actually what helps us. I think that's what helps us kind of get out of our own way and arrive into our bigger, more essential self or wholeness. Like it's what helps us with perspective. Ultimately, we go from feeling like a really small, crammed and jammed place, a kinked up place, to a sort of loose, spacious, lubricated place with like, oh, I can see farther now, or I can see, if that makes sense.
It does, and it helps me see that I think a part of me, I was at odds, but a part of me was looking to a spiritual life to eclipse my heart in a way. And that sounds, but it was because I didn't trust it, and because I'd been hurt. I was looking for something to transcend it. Mm-hmm. So it was like a
magic bullet, you mean?
No, but it was something that, it was one of the reasons why Buddhism appealed to me, at least like the more austere stuff, is because there wasn't a lot of like, yeah, let's all have heart-based practices and love. And it was like, no, that's where I've felt betrayed. That's where I've had my heart broken. That's where I've felt hurt tremendously. Let's go just agree that everything's an illusion and this doesn't matter. It was this kind of, there's a bit of, I wouldn't say it's nihilism, but there is a truth to that austerity. At the non-dual level. But it wasn't about cultivating more heart connection and more relationship with self. Essentially, I was like, all right, that's messy as fuck in there. And that has gotten me into some seriously painful places. Let's just not go there anymore. And I think
that's pretty natural.
I was really attracted to the idea of just being able to like bloop and not have to experience that and not feel vulnerability or pain. And I don't think it was necessarily advertised to that, but I wouldn't say I'm the only one that went towards that. I know a lot of state chasers and bypassers that are on that path.
Definitely.
And I was one of them.
And much of the work that I've done in my therapy office over the last 30 years has been about when there's the desire to return, you are confronted with the things that had you go away in the first place.
For sure.
It does feel like life and death often. And so that's real. You got to work that out in the heart, but also the nervous system and all that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing this today. I've not asked you these questions before. I'm really
surprised that you went here for somebody that didn't want to sit down and do this today. You ended up having you gave me a really nice morning regardless.
Yeah. I love you.
I love you too. Thank you. It's really, I don't even know what to say, but I love when you bring your authentic curiosity to me. Opens me right up.
If these interviews are helping you, please leave a positive review on whatever podcast app you use so that others can discover the show more easily.